When I heard through the grapevine that Mason had gotten married and settled into a brand new house in his new city, the truth finally hit me with a weight I couldn't ignore. It wasn't a rumour, it wasn't a temporary fling or a rebound for him. It was real. He wasn't coming back. He wasn't going to suddenly wake up one day, realise he'd made a mistake, and try to rebuild the life we had left behind. That chapter was permanently closed, whether I liked it or not. And you know what's ironic? People keep asking me if I regret what I did. Like, seriously, do they really think regret is the right word for what I feel? 8 years of the same predictable cycle, the same small talk repeated over and over, the same endless routine that drained the colour out of my life. And I'm supposed to regret finally breaking free? Mason thinks he caught me doing something unforgivable. But maybe, just maybe, I finally figured out what I actually wanted from life. My name is Hazel. I'm 32 years old, and I need to put this into words because honestly, there's no one left in my circle who would truly understand. My closest friends are all knee-deep in their marriages, raising kids, or they've moved across the country. My parents would just throw the same tired lecture at me about loyalty, sacrifice, and the importance of sticking with your commitments, no matter how miserable they make you. So instead, I'm here, telling you the truth, not because I expect sympathy, but because I want someone to hear me out without judgment, to hear my side of the story, the side no one else ever bothered to ask about. I met Mason at work when I was just 24. I was in the billing department, buried under spreadsheets and invoices, while he worked in maintenance, fixing leaks and managing repairs on another floor. 2 completely different worlds, but somehow we kept running into each other in the break room and during lunch. He was sweet, almost painfully so. He'd ask about my day like he genuinely cared, and he had this way of remembering the tiniest things I'd mentioned in passing. If I said I was stressed, he'd surprise me with a coffee the next morning. If I mentioned I liked a certain snack, it would mysteriously appear on my desk within days. At that age, at that stage of my life, I thought it was romantic. I thought it was the kind of attentiveness you only read about in novels. Looking back now, with older eyes and more complicated experiences, I can admit it was a little clingy. But at 24, it felt like devotion. We began hanging out after work, and those evenings felt safe, warm, and uncomplicated. We'd curl up on the couch of his tiny apartment, watching movies until we were half asleep, eating cheap takeout, talking about nothing important until long past midnight. It wasn't glamorous, but it was easy, comforting, like slipping into soft pyjamas at the end of a long day. After about a year of this, Mason suggested that I move in, not in a pushy way, he never pressured me, but in that casual, logical style of his. He pointed out how much money we'd save on rent, how I was basically living with him already, how it made sense. And he wasn't wrong. So, I did. 2 years later, we bought a little house together, a small white-fenced place that looked like something out of a magazine about responsible young couples starting their lives. But with it came the mortgage, and to me, that mortgage didn't feel like an achievement. It felt like a set of chains around my ankles, dragging me deeper into a life I wasn't sure I wanted. Everyone around us praised us, though. So responsible, they said. So mature. Such a perfect couple. Mason basked in those compliments. He loved them. His whole face would light up when people admired our life together, like he'd just won a contest I didn't remember entering. Life with Mason fell into rhythm, one that on paper looked ideal but in reality felt suffocating. He'd wake up every morning at 6:30 sharp, kiss my forehead while I pretended to still be asleep, and shuffle into the kitchen to make coffee in those matching mugs his mother had given us for Christmas. He'd ask me how I slept, tell me about his odd dreams, and go over little reminders about our schedule. Dinner with his family, a project for the weekend, bills we needed to pay. Weekends were the same cycle: grocery shopping, tidying up, maybe a movie if we felt spontaneous. He was always brainstorming ways to improve our life. A new home project, a short road trip, a holiday tradition. It was constant effort from him, but instead of making me feel loved, it made me feel trapped, like he was reinforcing walls I already wanted to break through. Sometimes we talk about children. He was open to the idea, but I always said, not yet, maybe later. The thought of being even more tied down made my chest tighten with panic. Mason never pushed. He'd smile, nod, and say there was no rush, that he was happy with just us for now. But his calm acceptance only irritated me more. It wasn't that he was doing anything wrong. It was that his quiet, steady contentment highlighted how restless and dissatisfied I was. And that's when the cracks began to form. Here was a man who adored me, who thought his life was complete with me by his side, who cherished Saturday mornings with coffee and newspapers like they were sacred. And instead of being grateful, I found myself resenting it. I wanted excitement, not comfort. I wanted fire, not lukewarm predictability. I began picking fights over the smallest things. If he left a dish in the sink, I'd snap. If he bought the wrong pasta brand, I'd blow up. If he wanted to watch another dry documentary instead of going out, I'd sulk. Mason's response? Always the same. He'd apologise. He'd fix it. He'd try harder to make me happy. And every time he did, it made me feel worse. I wanted him to fight back, to challenge me, to show some spark. But instead, his face would just fall into hurt confusion, and he'd ask what he could do better. The hardest part was how everyone else loved him. My friends adored him. My parents couldn't stop praising him. Even strangers noticed how attentive he was. He'd light up the moment I entered a room, remember conversations I'd long forgotten, surprise me with small but thoughtful gestures. And while most people would have seen that as proof of a perfect partner, I began to feel suffocated by it. Every sweet act, every compliment, every thoughtful gesture felt like another invisible rope, tying me down to a life that didn't feel like mine anymore. It wasn't that Mason changed. If anything, the problem was that he didn't. He stayed the same steady, dependable man he'd always been. The same man I thought I wanted at 24. But at 30, I wanted more. Or at least, I thought I did. And then Dante entered the picture. It started innocently. He reached out to me through a professional networking site about some consulting work. At first, it was purely business. Questions, updates, details about projects. But soon, the tone shifted. Our conversations grew personal. While Mason asked about my day in the most routine way possible, Dante asked about my ambitions. He asked about the things that frustrated me, the goals I had shelved, the parts of myself I'd buried under the weight of our quiet suburban life. Where Mason agreed with everything I said in his calm, supportive way, Dante challenged me. He forced me to defend my ideas, to think critically, to spark with energy I hadn't felt in years. Dante was polished, sophisticated, the kind of man who had travelled, who had opinions about art and wine and politics. He was the complete opposite of Mason's homebody routine. Talking to him felt intoxicating, like exercising muscles I didn't realise had gone stiff from disuse. Those message threads quickly became the highlight of my day. I'd smile at my phone in ways I hadn't in years, laugh at his jokes, feel flattered by his attention. When Mason would casually ask who I was texting, I'd lie without hesitation. I'd say it was work, or a girlfriend. The lies rolled off my tongue so easily it startled me, but the thrill outweighed the guilt. Dante made me feel alive, intelligent, desired, not just loved in the safe, predictable way Mason loved me, but wanted in a way that stirred something in my chest I thought I'd lost. When Dante suggested we meet during a weekend training session in his city, we both knew what that really meant. And I wanted it. God, I wanted it more than I had wanted anything in years. So I told Mason about the training. I framed it as just another professional opportunity. And Mason, ever supportive, nodded with pride. He told me how proud he was of me for investing in my career, how he'd cover the household bills while I was gone, how he'd handle things so I could focus. He even helped me pack. He ironed my blouses, folded them neatly, asked if I needed anything else. And while he was carefully pressing my shirts, I was secretly planning my betrayal. I stood there, watching him, and I felt torn in two. Part of me was disgusted by my deception, horrified by the ease with which I was lying. But the other part of me was thrilled, excited, like I was about to step into a life that had been waiting for me all along. I pushed down the guilt and told myself I deserved this. I deserved passion, even if it meant shattering the heart of the man who had spent 8 years building his world around me. That weekend was the start of everything. That weekend, away with Dante, marked the beginning of everything that followed. And no matter how I try to rationalise it now, I know exactly what I was doing. From the moment I boarded that train, suitcase in hand and heart hammering in my chest, I was already stepping into betrayal. And yet, instead of guilt drowning me, there was this intoxicating mix of excitement and fear that coursed through my veins. I remember looking out of the window, watching the scenery blur past, and feeling like I was shedding an old skin. Hazel, the dependable partner, Hazel, the perfect girlfriend, Hazel, the steady half of a stable couple, she was being left behind on that platform. The version of me that arrived in Dante's city was something entirely different. She was bold, daring, hungry for life in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be in years. Meeting Dante in person only solidified that transformation. He was magnetic in ways Mason had never been. Where Mason was soft and careful, Dante was sharp, confident, commanding. He had an aura that demanded attention the moment he entered a room, and he knew it. When he hugged me for the first time, it wasn't a tentative gesture. It was firm, unapologetic, like he was already claiming space in my life. That weekend, every line I thought I would never cross blurred until it disappeared entirely. Dinner turned into drinks. Drinks turned into laughter, and laughter turned into us, tangled in sheets, before I'd even processed how quickly the world around me had shifted. I would love to say guilt kept me awake that night, but the truth is, it didn't. What kept me awake was exhilaration, the way Dante made me feel like I was 20 again, reckless and alive, burning with the thrill of desire instead of drowning in the monotony of routine. For the first time in years, I wasn't the steady partner, the practical homeowner, the good girlfriend. I was wanted, desired, consumed. And in that haze of passion, guilt barely had a chance to whisper in my ear. When I returned home, Mason greeted me at the door like nothing had changed. He asked about the training, made me dinner, and massaged my shoulders when I said I was tired. He had no idea that I was carrying someone else's touch on my skin, that I was replaying someone else's laughter in my mind. And the cruel part. Instead of confessing, instead of ending things cleanly, I smiled, kissed his cheek, and thanked him for being so thoughtful. Because in that moment, I didn't want to give up either life. I wanted both. The stability Mason offered and the fire Dante ignited. And so, the double life began. Days were for Mason, nights were for Dante. Mason and I would eat dinner together, talk about bills or family visits, while I secretly waited for Dante's late-night texts. Mason would ask if I was okay when I smiled down at my phone, and I'd lie without missing a beat. It was just work, or just a friend checking in. He trusted me so completely that my lies slid past him like watered-down glass. That trust should have broken me. It should have been the thing that made me stop. But instead, it made me bolder. Dante and I began meeting more often, quick weekend trips, afternoons where I told Mason I had extra shifts or networking events. Every time, Mason believed me. Every time, he encouraged me. And every time, I let him. The deception became second nature, so ingrained that I barely noticed how easily it flowed. What I did notice, though, was how much more alive I felt when I was with Dante. He challenged me, teased me, made me feel like I was a woman worth chasing instead of a predictable partner whose life was already mapped out. I started dressing differently, thinking differently. Even my laughter changed, sharper, freer, louder. But here's the thing about living two lives, eventually they collide. And when they do, the crash is catastrophic. Mason wasn't stupid. Naive, yes. Too trusting, maybe, but not blind. Over time, he started noticing the cracks, the late nights I couldn't explain, the sudden changes in my mood, the way I seemed distant even when we were sitting side by side on the couch. He would ask gentle questions, nothing accusatory, just soft nudges. Is everything okay? You seem distracted. Are you sure work isn't overwhelming you? And every time I brushed him off with a smile, a kiss, or a half-hearted excuse. But I could see it in his eyes. The doubt was starting to creep in. The breaking point came one night when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. Mason reached for it absent-mindedly, thinking it was his. And before I could stop him, his eyes caught the name on the screen. Dante. The silence that followed was suffocating. My heart dropped into my stomach, and for a split second, I thought maybe I could still lie my way out. But the look on his face told me everything. Mason knew. He might not have known the details, but in that one instant, he knew enough. The confrontation wasn't explosive, not at first. Mason wasn't the kind of man to scream or throw things. Instead, he asked questions in that calm, measured tone of his. Who is he, Hazel? How long has this been going on? Why didn't you tell me? And the worst part, the part that will haunt me forever, was the way his voice cracked when he asked, was I not enough for you? What could I even say to that? That he was too safe, too steady, that his love felt like a cage instead of wings. I wanted to scream that it wasn't about him, it was about me, that I needed more. But the words stuck in my throat because deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Mason was enough. He had always been enough. I was the one who wasn't satisfied. I was the one who craved something else, something dangerous, something fleeting. For the first time in 8 years, Mason didn't apologise. He didn't ask what he could do better. He just sat there, staring at me with a look I'd never seen before, cold, broken, and resolute. And then he said the words I didn't think he was capable of saying. I can't do this anymore, Hazel. He packed a bag that night. No shouting, no tears, just quiet movements as he folded his clothes and slipped them into a suitcase. I followed him from room to room, begging him to stay, telling him we could fix it, promising I'd end things with Dante. But Mason didn't even look at me. He just zipped up his bag, grabbed his keys and walked out the door. And just like that, the life we'd built together for nearly a decade crumbled in a single evening. The house felt unbearable after he left. Too quiet, too empty, too full of memories that mocked me. I tried to distract myself with Dante, throwing myself deeper into that fiery, intoxicating world we'd built. At first, it worked. The nights with him were passionate, distracting, thrilling. But slowly, cracks began to form there too. Dante wasn't Mason. He wasn't steady. He wasn't reliable. He wasn't someone who would iron my shirts or remember how I took my coffee. He was exciting, yes, but excitement fades. The fire that once burned so bright began to flicker, and in its place came arguments, distance, unmet expectations. And then, one morning, I heard that Mason had moved to a new city, that he'd gotten married, that he had bought a house with his new wife. It was like the final nail in the coffin of my old life. There would be no second chances, no dramatic reconciliation, no moment where he came back to me, realising we were meant to be. Mason had rebuilt, and he had done it without me. And all I had left were the ashes of what I'd burned down, with my own hands. After Mason left, I thought I could fill the silence with Dante. I convinced myself that all I had done, the lies, the betrayal, the destruction of my relationship, would make sense if Dante was the reward waiting at the end of it. I told myself that passion would be enough, that fire would sustain me where comfort could not. And for a while, it seemed to work. Dante swept me up in his world with late-night calls, impulsive outings, and a kind of intensity that felt like a drug coursing through my veins. He made me feel like the centre of the universe one moment and challenged me like an equal the next. After years of Mason's steady devotion, Dante's unpredictability felt intoxicating. But the thing about fire is that it burns out if you don't feed it. And Dante wasn't interested in feeding it forever. What I mistook for passion was in reality convenience. I was an escape for him, a distraction, something thrilling because it was secret and forbidden. Once Mason was out of the picture, once the stakes were gone, the dynamic shifted. Dante no longer had to chase me, no longer had to steal moments in the shadows. And without the danger, without the secrecy, what was left between us wasn't enough. We started fighting, small things at first, where to eat, whose place to stay at, whether I was too emotional. But those fights grew sharper, more frequent. Dante wasn't patient like Mason. He didn't soothe or apologise when things went wrong. He pushed back, sometimes cruelly, reminding me that I was the one who had blown up my life, that I had chosen this path. He made me feel foolish for expecting stability from him, as though stability was never part of the deal. And maybe he was right. Maybe I had built a fantasy out of our affair, imagining that passion could transform into permanence. Eventually, Dante pulled away altogether. Fewer calls, shorter replies, excuses about being busy, until one day there was nothing at all, just silence where the fire had once been. And there I was, alone, in the house Mason and I had bought together, surrounded by memories I couldn't escape, and regrets that gnawed at me like a constant echo. The quiet was unbearable. I'd wake up in the morning reaching for a body that wasn't there. I'd hear the hum of the coffee maker and remember how Mason used to hand me a mug without even asking how I wanted it. I'd walk past the photos on the wall, smiles frozen in time, trips we took, holidays we celebrated, and feel like I was staring at someone else's life, a life I had recklessly set on fire. The worst part was knowing that Mason had moved on, that he wasn't stuck in the ruins the way I was. He had rebuilt. He had found someone else to love, someone who hadn't betrayed him, and I was left to sift through the ashes of my own choices. People often ask if I regret it, and the answer isn't as simple as yes or no. Do I regret hurting Mason? Absolutely. Do I regret lying, cheating, and tearing apart the life we had built together? Every single day. But do I regret discovering that I needed more than just comfort and predictability? That's where the truth gets complicated, because part of me still believes that if Mason had been able to ignite that spark in me, if he had been able to make me feel alive instead of just safe, maybe I wouldn't have strayed. Maybe I wouldn't have opened the door when Dante came knocking. But blaming Mason is the easy way out, and deep down, I know better. Mason gave me everything he had. He loved me fully, in the only way he knew how. It wasn't his fault that I craved something different. It wasn't his fault that I couldn't be satisfied with the love he offered. That was my failing, not his. And that's the hardest truth to swallow. That sometimes the problem isn't that your partner isn't enough. Sometimes the problem is that you can't appreciate what you have until it's gone. Looking back now, I see the pattern so clearly. I wanted both comfort and passion, stability and fire. I wanted Mason's devotion and Dante's intensity. But life doesn't work that way. You can't split yourself in two and expect both halves to thrive. Eventually, the lies catch up, the walls collapse, and you're left standing in the rubble of your own making. If there's anything I've learned from all of this, it's that desire without honesty leads to destruction. That chasing passion while betraying loyalty doesn't make you free. It makes you hollow. And that once trust is broken, no amount of apologies or promises can fully repair it. Mason's face the night he walked out will stay with me forever, Not because of the anger, but because of the quiet finality in his eyes. That was the moment I lost him for good, and I knew it. Now, years later, I'm still haunted by what I did. I watch people around me building families, celebrating anniversaries, growing old together, and I wonder if I had chosen differently.